I thought I'm good at math and I'll do well in finance, but seemed like math was a very, very small part of finance. It was mostly sales and so on. And I just couldn't see myself fitting into the shoes of my boss or his boss a few years later. Just
Right.
couldn't aspire to be those people because that was not who I was. So I realized that I wanted to go back into technology, and so at that point I moved back to India and joined InMobi. That move worked out pretty well for me. I'm enjoying what I'm doing now, and at that point I had no idea that Barclays was my first job. So when I moved to InMobi, it was my first time in Bangalore and my first time working for an Indian company, and first time working for a tech company as well. And things in the Indian startup ecosystem were fairly premature at that time. This was 2013. So, but I think the move worked out really well for me, and I was lucky to have taken that bold decision earlier rather than later. So yeah, I think since then a lot of people have actually asked me whether it was good. Uh, I mean, how the move went for me, and how did I decide about it? What was the framework through which I sort of thought about doing all this? And I kind of shared all of this in an article. So I'll shortly post the link of that article in case any of you are interested to read it.
Yeah, that would be great.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, Movin, you start in product management in InMobi?
No. So I joined as a data scientist, weird as it may sound. But 2013, things were not so mature, as I said, and people didn't know what data science is. InMobi had no data science team. So they wanted to start one, and they thought maybe I could be the first member.
Mm-hmm.
I said I am in no position to do that. I'm not a data scientist by training, but they said, okay, just come on board and we'll figure it out. So that's what I did. And over time, I realized I was doing some data science, some product management, and some just analytics. And I think roles were fairly fungible at that time. The teams were not super structured. And anyway, in startups, things keep changing. So I think about a year later, I found myself doing mostly product management, but still not officially part of the product team. There was a separate team that was trying to do some real time optimization, and I was part of that team. So, and I kind of started figuring out what does product management really mean, what does data science really mean, and I guess InMobi also went through its own cycle of understanding each of these roles better. So, I think over time, I ended up starting my own venture, and during that time, and even during the time at InMobi, I ended up realizing that product management is the thing that I want to do out of all the roles that I kind of could understand. So yeah, I think when I joined InMobi, things were very unstructured, and I didn't know what exactly I'm going to do. But I think at that point, anyway, this ecosystem was also fairly young.
Yeah. So I think that's the story almost with a lot of people because uh, even for me, I wasn't aware of the product management role itself because I started in marketing. And once I went into marketing at Freshworks, I got to know about product management. And
Right,
then actually I got to know that this is actually what I want to do. But the
right.
transition was not easy. I was finding it very difficult to get my first job in product management. Uh, yeah. So, but once I got in, it's been good. It's been good. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Just wanted to intervene here. So, did you have any prior experience in tech? Because you said that you moved from marketing to product. So,
I was in
except
Freshworks, so I was in product marketing. So
okay,
making a switch wasn't that difficult because I was in the tech marketing side of it.
sure.
But yeah, so things were not happening. So I told my manager that I want to move, and they asked me to deliver something. I had delivered, and even then I was in mood. Then I just found an opportunity for an APM in some other company in delivery. Once I got that, I put my papers in Freshworks, and the next day I got moved. So I had to pull some strengths to move, but it was worth it. Uh, we have Deepak who joined us. Deepak,
Hey guys,
hi.
sorry, I was trying to unmute myself on this phone, but it wasn't picking it up last time. Okay, so hey guys, I'm Deepak Raj. I'm 2015 batch. I think I can see Raj over here. We were on the same track, and I've been the G from the campus now almost 5 years. I've worked on various roles, some part in product management, some part in project management, and some part is just like a whole internship in GE. Currently, for last 2 years, I'm working in finance domain, and we are making products for B2B customers and oriented around finance. And I had one of the finance data lakes. So the major product piece that I've been working on are how to enable FP&As, operations, controllership, and all of those folks with the latest data around visualization tools and cloud computing, big data computing.
Thanks, Deepak. Is there anyone else?
Hey Deepak, nice to see you. Nice to see
Same
you.
here, Raj.
You both are from 2015 pass. That's it. Okay.
Yeah.
So Deepak, where
Yeah,
do
you're
you
from the
work?
same
You
batch
said
and
I'm
finance.
working with
You said right. Which company?
I'm I'm working with GE and specifically
Okay.
GE corporate.
So,
Oh, okay.
okay. Just to get a topic, like, what are the tools that you guys use in day-to-day life as a product manager? Anyone wants to go on, take a stab on that topic? The tools that you guys use in the day-to-day
Maybe
basis?
I'll start. I think for me, it has always depended on which tools, vendors, and stacks the company I'm working for is using. So currently, Meesho uses Mixpanel for all its clickstream analytics. So I end up using Mixpanel quite a lot. Other than that, of course, there's the usual SQL and spreadsheet work that you do for all kinds of analytics on top of the data lake. So usually there, it's slightly more agnostic of the underlying technology. But I think SQL and Mixpanel are sort of the two most frequent tools that I use. Other than, I'm not counting Google Sheets, but technically that's also a tool.
Movin, how exactly do you guys use Mixpanel? I mean, do you guys see the funnel, or do you guys look at metrics? What kind of things do you guys look at?
Yeah, so we basically send all our clickstream to Mixpanel, and and all of that then eventually flows into our data lake. So a lot of the analysis where we just need to do something simple like funnel analysis can be done right in Mixpanel. And the advantage there is Mixpanel is actually very solid in terms of loading even months of data with billions of rows very fast. So you can see trends of metrics where you have a lot of data. Mixpanel can load that pretty fast, and also you of course don't have to write SQL queries because it's a visual interface. The trade-off is you can't do very complicated analysis. You can't do things like you have your own cohort based on certain metrics. You want to do some cohort analysis. You want to analyze the results of some A/B experiment that you ran. All of that can mostly not be done in Mixpanel. And Mixpanel also doesn't have much capabilities for uploading your own audiences or your own data sets and so on. So all of that then needs to be done in our customized data lake. So Meesho uses Redshift as its data lake, but
Right.
different companies could have a different answer for this. And all of the data that's in Mixpanel also flows into our data lake, which is
But I
Redshift.
think there's an integration with external. I mean, it's not. So I think that it's not just the people who have used the front end of the application that goes into Mixpanel. I think you can also integrate with your other applications to pull in user information, right?
Yes, you can. But still, the thing is that if you want to write any customized query, so Mixpanel has its own query language called JQL.
Yeah.
And then that like portability from JQL to SQL is kind of a challenge. So we don't want, so Meesho, for example, might have about 100 people who are writing SQL queries. We don't want all of them to have to learn JQL because that's another added burden on the organization to train them in JQL. If it's only one or two people, then it's easy. So we've typically stuck to doing any kind of more complicated analysis in our own data lake rather than in Mixpanel. So I use Mixpanel more for like creating dashboards of some of the top level metrics, some of the funnels, and so on, because Mixpanel does a great job there. But yeah, some of the more complicated ad hoc analysis that we do, we typically try to do it in the data lake.
Yeah, I love the dashboard of Mixpanel because where you have a widget kind of mode where you can plug and play whatever metrics that you want to keep.
Right.
Yeah, that's good. What do you guys use for internal collaboration?
So,
Raj?
Raj, yeah. Generally, I have been using Tableau for last couple of years, and I'm curious to understand. And anyone has used Tableau here? So, like Movin said, Movin, is Tableau similar to Mixpanel, or is it Mixpanel something very different from it?
Tableau is a
I think
visualization tool, but Mixpanel you can actually integrate with the product data. And for Tableau, I'm not sure if it can be done. Moment, do you want to take a stab
Okay.
at this?
Because Tableau also does almost the same thing. So we do integrate it with the data lake, and you have different kind of integration in that,
yeah, I think
ranging from simple Excel
so. I think
ranging from
Tableau
simple
is
Excel sheet to the data lake.
so Tableau is slightly different in the sense that you can put Tableau on top of any underlying database, and then it
Right.
helps you create dashboards, visualizations, queries, and so on. So Meesho uses Metabase for that. So we have Redshift as the underlying database, and on top of that we use Metabase, which is probably a much lighter and less feature-rich sort of competitor of Tableau. And I think it's also free. It's a Google product.
Okay.
So we don't use Tableau and have not used Tableau before, but I think from what I know about the use case, it's similar to Metabase, just that it's much more feature rich and customizable, and a lot of things come out of the box instead of you having to do it manually.
Right. Right.
But Mixpanel is slightly different in the sense that you might have heard of CleverTap and so on. So Mixpanel is in that category where you can send your clickstream from the client side directly to Mixpanel. So Mixpanel records all those events. So it's actually a clickstream analytics solution, not just a data lake. In fact, Mixpanel is not designed to be a data lake or a data analytics solution.
Okay.
Okay.
Just
So
that it
Raj,
does do some of those things on the side, just because it has all the data.
We have been using Tableau works really well with a lot of our relational DBs and all of those oriented designs. Uh, for us, we are using Google Analytics, Clickstream engines, and all of those things integrated into the products itself, so that they give us the Clickstream and all the user base and logins, all of the different matrices that we are getting from the website or the app, and sourcing it into one of our data lake environment. Over it, if I would say we have, I think because of this big company and all of these things, we have used all flavors, Tableau, Spotfire. Uh, I think we haven't used Metabase. I think that is one that moving you are telling is a very light uh, engine, is it? So we'll check that. But overall, Raj, these are mainly data exploration, much more on the Tableau side, where you give and do data explore. I think Clickstream, where you just need to see matrices already built and all of these things, I will much go for the lighter platform. Anyway.
Okay. Get it.
Do you still guys do wireframes, or you kind of just do the PID and let the designers do the wireframes? I
I
mean,
think in Meesho we typically, I mean, now the product team has become quite big. When I joined, we were about 3 people. Now we are about 40. So I think the answer was different at that time. At that time, there was nothing called PRDs, and we would just talk to engineers over a cup of coffee and tell them, "Ye bana lete hain," and then they would just start coding. But today we have a much more formal process. So usually, when we start thinking of a problem, first we have to identify the problem, think of details of the problem, and then we come to sort of trying to solve it. While we are trying to solve it, at that point, usually there'll be some whiteboard discussions where the product manager would probably initiate with some very rough sketch on the whiteboard. And then the first few iterations of the design will still be proposed by the designer. But yeah, in between, maybe about 6 months or 1 year back from now, there was a time when the product manager would sort of come up with an initial sketch. Again, not sketch in some tool or something, but just on the whiteboard or on a piece of paper, and then would sort of share it with the designer. But we had just one designer, so we would typically want to save their bandwidth, and the product managers would do all the initial wireframing. And then when it actually got to sort of doing design inside some design tool, that's when the designer would get involved.
So I used to use Whimsical for doing the wireframes, but a lot of times I got a pushback from my designers saying that the design team is just not UI. They need to be on the UX also. So they always told me, gave a pushback saying that don't do the wireframes, we'll do the wireframes because we own the UX essentially and not just the UI. So I use wireframe just to explain my model to the designer. Uh, I use Whimsical for that, but a lot of times they push back saying that don't do the wireframes, just give us the business problem that we're solving and just give us the PID.
Yeah, I
Has
think that's
animal
one
balsamic
thing
or
which
sorry,
is good.
please go. So yeah, I was saying, has anyone tried balsamic or Envision? I think balsamic gives a pretty good start to wireframes as well. Pretty easy to use and gives all the functionalities as well.
Yeah, I use both Balsamic and Envision.
Which one do you find
Yeah.
better? Because I haven't had much experience on Envision. Balsamic was good, but very like a starter thing, wherein you won't get much of the functionality, but it's easy to make your wireframes.
So Envision, it's more like a prototype where you can have clicks and actions. So all the designers ideally use Envision because they import their sketch files to Envision and they make
Okay.
prototypes so that
Okay.
they can demo the product. But for wireframes, I found Whimsical easier because maybe I've started using Whimsical a lot more. It's very similar.
Whimsical.
Yeah, Whimsical. Yeah.
Sorry, I have one question. Does any of you use Sketch? Because since we are still setting up the team here, so and it's a bank, so things go slow. So, but they were suggesting that we use Sketch for
See,
design. Does
so
any of
yeah, I mean, so said just pay. So yeah,
Okay.
like unlike others, so we do the wireframe plus even an initial design, say how it might look. So as in, even product managers are encouraged to do design as well. So we use Sketch,
Okay.
and currently we are even migrating from Sketch to Figma.
Okay.
Figma is even more powerful because you can do it collaboratively.
Yeah, I think Figma is one of the best. I think lately I've heard from designers that Figma is the best wireframe and prototype too.
Yeah, yeah,
So doesn't Sketch
pretty
allow
simple.
collaboration, Shahid?
Sorry.
Doesn't Sketch allow collaboration in the
No, it
within the
doesn't.
team?
Yeah,
No, no, it
so no, it doesn't. So you can use like so. Sketch is of course handy, but Figma, since it provides collaboration, it is much more easier to, for especially in times of COVID and all. So
Okay.
all of us are on the same page, and then we discuss there, and we make when changes required then and there, so that everyone understands it.
So Sketch is more like Photoshop. Uh, so it's like using a rocket engine for airplane. So
Okay.
I used to get Sketch, but a lot of in the company they gave a pushback that why do you want to get a Sketch license? It is meant only for designers. Why do you want to waste it? Use a basic tool.
Okay.
Yeah, so Sketch is really good, but I think it's too much for a product manager. Figma is really good
Awesome.
because Sketch
Okay.
the collaboration is not that great.
Right, I agree with this. In fact, in our company, in Mobilium, Sketch is used by the UX designers. We as a product manager, we either give it on a paper or whiteboarding, or probably we use Balsamic kind of tool, which is very initial design to just set up the context that this is how it should be or something like that, the workflow. But Sketch and finally the InVision as a prototype is basically or majorly being used by the designers. And especially we use InVision a lot just because it has a demo kind of feel. So even before we are building the product, we have this InVision setup with us, in which we can show the almost the kind of flow we want to clients, to give them an idea of what we are presenting and what we are trying to build up, and to gather the feedback from other people. So that's how we use it.
Movin, I think you had some point to share here.
Yeah, so I was saying that we use Sketch. Typically, product managers don't. And as I said, mostly it's the designers who come up with even the first formal wireframe. And I think in our case also, the designers want to hear about the business problem and start thinking from there, rather than the product guy coming up with a wireframe and a UX and then asking the designers to only do visual. Because I mean, in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of design, I think UX comes before UX is much above visual. and that's how designers seem to think, and that's how their market seems to operate. So they also want to think about UX from scratch rather than the product manager dictating terms. But for collaboration, as someone said, Sketch is not that great. But think still some of the old school designers still love Sketch because they've been working on it for a long time. So they create designs in Sketch, but for collaboration, we use Zeppelin. Some of you might have heard of it. So you can export from Sketch to Zeppelin. It's like uploading a CSV into Google Sheets. So you can't collaborate on CSV, but once you upload it to Google Sheets, you can. Similarly, from Sketch, you can sort of export into Zeppelin, and then you can pass around the Zeppelin link. It's a cloud solution where everyone can see the thing, but Zeppelin doesn't allow editing. So if you am a designer and you are a developer and I'm trying to give you the design, then I'll just give it to you in the Zeppelin link, so that you don't, as a developer, you don't need to edit anything. You can just look at my design, see the pixel level details, how much pixels you have to leave between this and this, what padding and all of that. You can see all of those details the way I have designed it. But you cannot edit anything. So Zeppelin is very good for that, and it has very good collaboration tools. But I've also heard recently that Figma is very good. I've not tried it myself.
So the only thing that I always found it difficult was the copy. So the product copy was owned by the product team, and any change in the product copy, I had to go back to the design and ask them to change it. I always wanted to, offload it from the design and maybe edit in the design, but I was never able to do it. I had to go to the design team and then create the sketch file and then upload in Zeppelin.
Makes sense. Does Figma solve for that?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I was looking for
using Figma as in see you can you can share it with multiple people, and you can even be a part of it, right? So say I need a change that I can even comment it on the same file, and then the developer or the designer can be viewing it right away, and then he can just change it and show it to you if it's working or not. So in that way, Figma becomes much faster to work on. I don't know if that helps, but yeah, you guys can try it out.
Once you comment it out, the designer will make the changes and then we can see it.
Yeah. I mean, so you can just on the fly you can just make all the changes.
Oh, on the fly also.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like a Google Doc.
Oh, okay.
It's like Figma is like a Google Doc for design.
Okay.
So you can just make changes there. You can see it. Multiple people can make changes simultaneously. You can even follow people or observe the technical term to see who's changing what, and then you can have a discussion, and then you can get it finalized right away.
Maybe we should do a Figma demo in one of our next sessions.
Yeah, that's interesting because generally we struggle for that. Even if you share InVision link or I think Zeppelin link, for changing anything, you need to go to Sketch, change the things, and upload it again, and that's kind of time intensive.
So moving on to the next topic, how do you guys handle your Scrum teams? Do you own the Scrum or do you offload it to your engineering managers? I mean, how hands-on are you with your everyday sprints and your Scrum team?
Maybe I'll start. So Meesho prefers to have the Scrum owned by the engineering team itself. Otherwise, there seems to be a feeling of engineers partially reporting into product managers, which we don't want to have. And so in some of the teams, we have engineering managers now. In my team, particularly, the engineers that are working with me are directly reporting into the VP of engineering. So the VP of engineering is part of our Scrum, and he used to run the Scrum till recently, but now he's asked for volunteers from sort of the individual developers. So every 2-3 weeks, every sprint, our sprint is 2 weeks. So every sprint, one person out of the team of about 10 to 20 developers volunteers to run the Scrum for that sprint.
So out of a sprint, what percentage is it's being developed for the product, and what is the tech debt or technical enhancements?
I think good question. That's one thing we regularly track now. So the way we track it is some sort of a man days kind of a metric, saying that out of, let's say, 10 developers with 10 days of work during the sprint, that's around 100 man days. How much percentage was spent on product OKRs, how much was spent on engineering tasks, and how much was spent on non-OKR tactical stuff that came up, which needs to be done ASAP, or any reactive measures that the business team decided to take, and so on. And we measure across all three. Ideally, I think the product OKRs has to occupy 80% of the engineering output, and the rest 20% should be engineering tasks like scaling of a particular system, going from single tenant to multi-tenant, going from monolithic to microservice-based architecture, or any other optimizations that they want to do, and so on. And the third part, which is tactically sort of reacting to any situations, it should be as close to zero as possible. That's what typically I think mature organizations want. So that's what we tend to stick to. In a slightly younger startup, so Meesho is now post Series D. Our technology team, including QA and everything, is around 150 people. So we're fairly mature. But probably when we were younger, the third part occupied like 30-40% of the bandwidth. So product OKRs would be 30-40%. This tactical measures would be 30-40%, and the rest, maybe 5-10%, would be engineering tasks. And the variance would be huge. Every sprint you would see a very different trend, whereas now we are trying to make sure it's regular from sprint to sprint, and things are sort of well paced out.
Right. So on a different note, do you guys follow a monolith or microservice kind of an architecture? Movin. So yeah,
Meesho moved from monolith to microservice about, I think, around the time when I joined, about a year and a half, about 2 years back. We're now completely microservice.
And also multi-tenant?
Yes, we are currently working on moving to multi-tenant. We've launched in Indonesia, so that kind of created the requirement to move to multi-tenant, but we've not moved everything to multi-tenant yet.
Okay.
Okay, I can go for like within the last 3 years how we matured. When we earlier started, Scrum used to be handled by, like, I used to handle all these Scrums. I was too deep in even the technology part, even the coding part with the team, because we were building some of the new products itself. But as we matured, that Scrum by itself, we have figured out that there is a lot of emotions that it attached to a Scrum. So we generally tend to do things as developer wants or engineering would want, and try to modify Scrum cycles or do few of the feature sets here and there depending on what has been delivered or not delivered, which is where we were feeling problems when we were trying to scale it up. Few of the teams were maybe changing their Scrum commitments and other things depending on the cycles, and they will try to show that these are the things that were part of Scrum and has been done. That is where we decided that maybe we will move the actual Scrum execution cycle out of the org. We outsourced it to a TCS team where the Scrum Master was a separate vendor team, and their task is to just maintain and run the cycles and report on the matrices, so that that bias around that Scrum goes away. It took up a bit of flexibility out of the team, but what we have seen is that execution rigor, as we matured, has actually improved the quality, performance, and other things. Because earlier it used to be a lot of fixes going on, a lot of emotion being driven. So it was never a fixed cycle. It keeps on moving as the requirement of the org goes from more startup thing to a more very mature org or a very mature product kind of a range.
Thank you, Deepak. So the next question I think we can pick up is, how do you prioritize features? I mean, do you prioritize customer requests or sales requests, or do you do your own research and then you prioritize features? How do you go about prioritizing features and what to build?
So, Mathivathan, I have just one question before we begin this discussion.
Yeah, sure.
Or probably a query. So when we're talking about these things, about the the tools we are using, or the Scrum cycle, or even the question you asked, So are we more focusing on a B2B kind of product line, or is it genetically we are talking about? Because see, my experience is more on a B2B side, but I'm really interested to understand if whatever we have discussed till now, it's for B2B specific, or is it generic to B2C also?
I think, in my opinion, the answer to the previous questions was probably not that sort of not going to be that different depending on whether it is B2B or B2C. But this particular question, I guess, tends to have very different answers for B2B versus B2C. So maybe whoever is answering the question can sort of qualify with mentioning the business model. Is it B2B and or B2C?
Do we have anyone in B2C here?
Yeah, I work for Lenskart.
You work for?
Lenskart.
Okay, so how does things work over there? Is it any different from what we?
Yeah, uh, I think what simplistic approach that we use is it's not. So the product I work for John Jacobs, the brand John Jacobs of Lenskart. So it's very simplistic model that we are using right now. It's not very matured. So we use two-pronged approach wherein first we take care of the sanity and then we think about the new features. So if something is we as everybody must be doing, look at the conversion funnel and if something needs to be fixed, if there's a drop or a substantial drop at some place, we take care of the sanity part there. We see what adding what feature or what information will give us will stop customers from dropping. And if there's a new feature, so with Lenskart or with eyeglasses, so to say, people have a problem of say size or trying issue. Basically, it's a look and feel product. So if we are going to add a new feature, we try to do that. We make a product that is more convenient to the customer. So it's mostly customer focused. A lot of changes are based on customer feedback that we receive through say our post sales team, NPS, or your even app feedbacks. When there are so that's the thing that everything is customer focused and we see if there's no pressing issue, then we move on to the feature. Otherwise, pressing issues take precedence over everything else.
Do you guys validate your prototypes with the customers before you do it for development?
Not really, but we do A/B testing. So we use Fresh Marketer. We try so if there are we try to create multiple iterations of the product. I'd be very blunt over here and say that we see how it is being done in your Amazon, your Warby Parker, or Glasses USA, and we try to adapt it to what we want to do in a way that it is simple for the customer by keeping the basic design metrics in mind. And we do iterations. So whatever helps you get more conversion from that particular point to the next point, and also gets you more customers on board. So basically, whoever creates that order after clicking that point or finds that feature helpful, then we keep that iteration. We increase the iteration audience, and then we implement it on live.
Thanks, Sushant. So what do you guys use for A/B testing?
Fresh Marketer.
Oh, that's one of my previous product.
That's your product? Oh, great.
I mean,
you work in Freshworks?
I used to work in Freshworks.
Okay, great.
Nice. Good to hear.
So maybe I can also speak about the B2C side of things. Meesho, although it's our users are not exact consumers, but Meesho mostly behaves just like a B2C business, and I've worked with Ola before. So I think in both places, the way we decide what to build and the way we prioritize comes from 2-3 things. One is speaking to users and getting some anecdotal feedback, some subjective feedback and examples of things that are not working or problems. Second is looking at data and looking at your most important metrics for any product or any feature. Like currently I'm working on search. So the conversion of search, that is from the time someone searches to the time someone orders, I'm looking at that as the primary metric to decide whether search is working well. So look at that, then break it down and see where something is breaking and so on. And that kind of helps us understand what are the problems that are currently prevalent, and then we sort of decide what are the bigger problems. So there's some prioritization of problems. Once we know what are the biggest problems we need to go after that we then start solving each of the problems, or at least trying to create some skeleton solution for each problem. And at that point, it's obviously very difficult for any engineer to tell how much effort it might take. But that's where you have your engineering managers and your senior leaders of engineering who can probably be in a better position to estimate at that high level how much effort it might take. And based on some mixture of effort and potential impact / size of the problem, that's how we prioritize. It's not a super scientific process in the sense that we don't use any of those RICE framework and equation of impact minus effort or confidence or whatever. It's much less scientific than that because you don't have exact values for impact or effort. But
I doubt
yeah, so
anyone is any product team is actually using this scientific method. I don't think anyone is using the scientific methods for prioritizing.
I agree. I think it's very difficult to do that because when the actual product is 3 to 6 months or even more away, you don't know how much impact it's actually going to produce, and you also can't exactly measure the man days or man hours of
I think
effort.
it's very subjective. It's all of it very subjective, and that is why I think it's needed of human intervention itself.
Yeah.
Because otherwise,
And that's, I think, the art which I guess once you become good at, you keep becoming a better product manager or a better engineering leader. I think those are the things which you ultimately need to keep getting better at.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, I had a question. So while it is difficult to get at the expected impact of any change that you guys work at, but whenever you are making a change, how do you estimate what is the minimum threshold for an impact, or when you are looking at a KPI, how do you estimate that what is the minimum that the KPI should move for it to be worthwhile to put in the effort to do an A/B test or go for an MVP?
Maybe I can try answering. So, in my case, what has so far happened is once you start looking at these metrics, and it's not something that, I mean, given that you've, I think, recently sort of started your product career, maybe it will take you a few months to and sort of get to a point in the particular company or in the particular product to understand what is the elasticity of various metrics. So, for example, the metric that I mentioned about search, conversion from search to order, I kind of now understand that by doing so and so, I can move this metric by 5%. Instead of 5, it could have been 50. And if I had joined Meesho today, I would not have known. So that I think is somewhere subjective, plus a lot of sort of ad hoc data analysis that you keep doing, because of which you kind of find out. So, and in a mature company like Amazon, let's say, I wouldn't hope to be able to move this metric by even 1% by any product feature, because 1% of a huge base is not easy to achieve. Versus where we are in Meesho right now, maybe I can, by building some small feature, I can improve it by 5%. So I think one dimension is how mature it is and how big the base is. Then second is by just looking at history. Okay, we launched this feature 3 months back. What happened with it, and so on. I think you just start developing some estimate. But I don't think I would hope. Like, I don't think I'll be able to get this estimate within the first 1 month of working on a product. It will take some bit of time for me to get there. And then you'll obviously keep refining your estimate as you make mistakes and so on. But I think for me, what happens is, so I have at least some very broad level estimate. Will the metric move by 5% or 0.5%? And then use that estimate to decide what are the bigger problems. And then once you start thinking of a skeleton solution to the problem, that's when you start actually fine tuning as to, okay, I thought I could move this metric by 5%, but looks like the solution is easier than I expected and seems to be showing very high confidence of actually solving the problem. So I'll probably end up moving it by 10%. Or it could be a negative shock as well, saying, oh, maybe I'll not be able to do 5%, maybe only 2%, because it seems like the devil was in the details. And when I started looking at the solution, it seemed like I won't be able to do much. So yes, there will be those changes, but at least at a broad level, that estimate starts happening in your mind as you spend a few months working on a product.
Okay.
So I
Maybe
have one
other
question
opinion.
yeah, Movin sir, since you're in a senior role, right, in the product space, so do you also get any guidance from the CEO office or anything? Like what KPIs do they want to be looking at for a particular quarter, or you know, any time frame they're looking at, or is it mostly decided by the product team?
Yeah, so I think it's a mixture of bottoms up and top down. The company usually has a strategy that in the next 1 quarter we want to achieve X, Y, and Z. And those X, Y, and Z can be measured by some metrics A, B, and C. So we want to improve metrics A, B, and C to something. So usually some of those could translate into product ideas, and you could say that, okay, since the company strategy is this, I will in this quarter I should focus on only this and build these 3 features to sort of achieve this particular objective of the company. It could also be that, and more often than not nowadays, we are trying to make it more bottoms up, where we as a product team would be expected to keep looking at this, set of problems that are occurring. Let's say, so I'm particularly currently working on search. So throughout the quarter, I would keep looking at, okay, what are the problems happening in search? What are the other companies doing? What is it that Flipkart or Amazon do, which we are not able to do today in terms of search? And say, okay, these are the gaps or these are the backlogs that we have currently. From these, what are the major problems or major wins that we could have by doing something for a quarter? And then, so like for this quarter at least, we had completely done it bottoms up. So we did all of that analysis. I did that along with my team, and we went back to the leadership team saying, hey, this is the set of OKRs that we think we should take for this quarter. Most of that got okayed, and we are actually working on exactly that list now. There'll be some to and fro, some discussion, some inputs that will come, some feedback, and some changes based on that. But yeah, so it's always a mixture of top to bottom versus bottoms up. And I mean, increasingly you want it to be bottoms up because the people who are closest to the data usually know what is more important. But sometimes when a startup is in a big sort of a hustle mode and growing really fast, sometimes the CEO just knows what needs to be done because there is a particular strategy, and they can see something in the market, or they have a certain hypothesis which they want to test out.
Okay.
Movin, I have a question for you. How did you transition from a individual contributor to a senior leader, kind of like people manager kind of a role in product?
Sure. So I think for me, I didn't really think about this transition, and I think it probably happened very suddenly for me. When I was running my startup, so I ran that for about 3 years, and during that time, I was doing both technology and product, and naturally, I was leading both those teams. We didn't really have any product managers other than myself, and we had a few engineers, and I was leading that team. I was writing code myself as well. So there, obviously, I naturally assumed the role of a leader as a founder. But when I left my startup and started looking for product roles, I was not very particular about whether I want to lead a team or work as an individual contributor. I was okay with anything. And at that point, I was just optimizing for learning. I thought, I've just been on my own for the last 3 years. So now I want to learn from someone senior. And that's how I chose, which role to take up. I joined Ola and was working for a very senior guy. That was the reason that I chose that particular role among the options I had. So, and there the role required me to lead a team. So that's what I did. But I don't think they explicitly sort of filtered for people who could lead teams versus people who could contribute individually. It was just that, okay, there were a certain set of problems that they wanted to be solved. And they felt that maybe I could solve those problems. And most of the interviews in that hiring process were about those problems itself and why I wanted to solve those problems or how I would try and solve those problems. And mostly wasn't about leadership. Probably the assumption was that since I've sort of led my own team in my startup, that's not going to be a problem. And then, I ended up starting with a team of about 10 people reporting to me in Ola. Not all of them were product managers. The product and business teams were kind of mixed up. Over time, we restructured and we had only about 4 to 5 product managers in my team. Then when I joined Meesho, I started as an individual contributor again. And then over time, built my team. Now my team is pretty small. In search, you don't need a lot of product managers. You need depth much more than breadth. So My team is 2 people now reporting to me. I've had a larger team before that, and so on. But yeah, I think to quickly answer your question, I think I didn't explicitly think about this transition. It just happened for me with sort of all the career changes. But I think when you think about this transition, I would say it's important to start small and have maybe one. Let's say you are currently a product manager or a senior product manager. Start with having 1 or 2 product analysts report into you. Do a great job of mentoring them and creating a product manager out of them. Maybe this, the product analyst is someone who's 1 year out of college or just out of college, and you're mentoring them by telling them what data analysis to do, how to do it well, how to think of writing a PRD, and so on. And once you start doing those things well, I think you also learn how to lead, a team of product managers, and I think from there you keep growing. In my case, it was, I think, a bit sudden and something that I also hadn't thought of. Hope this answers.
Yeah, Mohan. But yeah, so what do you think are the skills needed to be a product leader versus a product manager?
I think the biggest transition that happens when you become a product leader is from depth you go into breadth, and that's something which I mean, there is a trade-off there, in the sense that working on depth has its fun, has its intellectual requirements, and so on. Working on breadth requires a very different kind of skill set, where you know that you'll not be able to go into the details of everything. You'll need to trust your team. You will also still need to make sure they do the right thing. So it's matlab, you have to sort of spend less time on 5 things and get those 5 things done, versus spending a lot of time on one thing and getting that one thing done, right? So and I think to sort of transition into that skill, I don't think there's a single sauce or like any formula. It's just that you first, instead of managing one project, you manage 3 or manage 2, and get like start delegating some of your work to, let's say, a product analyst or something. And over time you sort of start learning how to delegate more and more, and be able to achieve the same level of output without spending all your time on one particular thing and going too deep. So I think that skill is something which you start developing over time, and it's not something that you can suddenly get. But I think being able to trust people, being able to hire the right team, being able to keep people motivated, I think all of those things matter a lot. And in product, because generally product requires a lot of depth, so moving away from that depth and into breadth is kind of important. And then the other thing is, you can actually become rusted if you are only about breadth and you don't know how to go into depth. Then you can very soon sort of lose confidence of your teammates. Ki, okay, this guy doesn't know anything and he keeps telling us what to do. So you also have to kind of at some points make trade-offs, saying, okay, in this particular thing, I will have to actually go into depth, and I can't just bullshit in front of my teammates and tell them something to do when I myself don't know about it. So I think in product, you have to kind of manage that transition carefully. And I actually, one of the reasons that I'm in product is that it requires depth more than breadth, even at leadership level. If you were in a business team or an operations team, all you need is breadth. So I think in product, you don't have to worry too much about being broad, because you can never manage to lose your depth. You still need to retain your depth. And I think that's, I mean, to me, even when I think of my next career transition, I still think that I want to go into a role that requires a lot of depth, because that's the part that I personally love and where I can do much better than others. I think breadth is something that, I mean, even when I'm 40, 45, I can actually take up breadth at that time also. And it's more of people skills, leadership skills, which are more intrinsic rather than, hard skills that you want to learn. So at this point, I feel that, when you're young, it's, I think, better to work on depth. And if leadership happens, or if you happen to have a team, great. If you happen to be able to delegate some of the stuff, great. But yeah, I explicitly don't think about, having a team.
On that, how do you get to the depth of something? Like, do you do your research online? How do you manage to get the depth of subject?
So I think depth has 2 things. One is outside in, and the second is inside out. I think outside in depth means, for example, if I'm currently working on search, do I know how Amazon does search? Do I know how Flipkart does search? Do I know how the evolution of search product is in an e-commerce company from, let's say, the day they have 100 customers to the day they have 1 million or 1 billion customers. So that is outside in, and that you typically get by talking to peers, talking to people who are doing the same thing in bigger companies and so on. The other is inside out depth, which is, have I looked at enough of Meesho's search data to understand how it is actually working, what really the problems are, what is our current technology solution, what are the tools we are using, and so on. So, and I think when I say depth, I mean both of them, but I think there are two different ways of developing each of these depths. And the inside out depth you'll only get when you've spent enough time sort of going deep into your own data, looking at, or questioning, okay, why is this metric moving like this? Let me do this particular experiment. What happens? Why did it happen like this? And so on. So I think there's a different way to achieve each of these depths, but you need both of them.
Do you guys also dog food your own product?
So I think in our case, actually, I don't fully understand the meaning of the term dog fooding, but probably it means using your own product. So I think in our case, it becomes a bit difficult because Meesho is mostly targeted at housewives. And for us, I mean, I think replicating that persona kind of becomes difficult. Think of it like us trying to dog food. I mean, I was working on the Ola driver app at some point. So dog fooding that also is very difficult because you have to first become a driver.
Yeah.
And while you can sort of spend one day on the road driving a car and trying to use the app, and that will give you some feedback, but really feeling, week on week, okay, is my income enough for me as a driver? I have to feed my family. All of those things are also, feeding into your use of the product. And those are things which we can't replicate.
Yeah.
So I think dog fooding to some extent happens. Some of us do try to sort of think like resellers, and Ola think like drivers and try to use the product. But yeah, I think it's limited. But let's say I was working in Swiggy on the consumer app, then it would be much easier.
Right. So a lot of times it comes with their own bias if you're trying to dog food something where we are not close enough to the user persona.
Yeah, agreed. And I think it has its own challenges. It also is sort of fairly interesting because you're getting to learn a new user segment. For us, I think instead of dog fooding, we substituted by just talking to users as much as possible. So maybe I'll share an article on that, which Meesho's blog had put out. But we launched this feature called image search about a year back. And the idea for that feature came from just a few conversations with users where we would just call them and say, okay, how's your business going? How are you liking Meesho? What can we do better? And it's not, like a templatized survey, but more like you start being friends with them. So I have like a lot of resellers on my WhatsApp, and when they encounter some problem with Meesho, they will message me on WhatsApp saying, sir, I'm not able to see this, or I'm not able to find this product, or I ordered this product, it hasn't come. I have to kind of act like customer care for them, which takes up some time, but it also builds a rapport and makes them trust me, so that the next time when they feel that something is missing in Meesho or something, there is something they want. They're obviously not technology experts, and they would probably feel shy talking to me about my work. Hey, this is what I think you should do. If they don't trust me, once they start trusting me, they'll throw ideas at me, and some of those ideas might actually be good, and they don't sort of feel afraid of looking like a fool when they throw an idea at me. So I think building that rapport is one thing which we do really well at Meesho, and that actually brings us a lot of good ideas.
Actually, I have a broader question, and this is not targeted at any particular individual. Are there resources or in forms of books or blogs that you guys would recommend as a good read to that'll help directly or indirectly as a product manager journey?
So personally, I feel you learn product management by doing than by reading. There are books which can help you clear interviews, but clearing interviews is one thing, but actually doing the job is another thing. So I think product management is something that you can learn only by doing. I found a couple of YouTube videos where product leaders have come and told about the experience that were good. It was on product conference or product school. Apart from that, I personally didn't find any books useful. But
Mm-hmm.
I do follow a few product leaders on Twitter and Medium. One guy is Anshuman Ramani. So I try to follow
Mm-hmm.
people, and yeah, I try to see their perspective, what problem they have solved, and yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't religiously read a book or something. I just try to follow people and what they have done.
Any news sources?
Yeah, so
Just,
Nilab,
just.
Raj here.
Mm-hmm.
I would suggest you to just go and browse those online courses, right? Udemy and and other things, right? Because the online course platform. So I have done one of them, which is like become a manager on
Mm-hmm.
Udemy. I think that was helpful for me. It's a elaborative course. There are good teachers over there who are experienced product managers, and they talk about how they have done it and what are challenges they have faced. So I found that course
Mm-hmm.
pretty interesting. So probably you can try out that in Udemy.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Uh,
Okay.
I I have something to add. So there's this guy called Sachin Reiki. He has a great set of like 100 resources. I mean, it was recently shared by Vijay Shekhar Sharma also, the Paytm guy. So you can probably explore that. So he has some 100 links which can help one kick off.
Okay. Can you repeat the name of the guy?
Sachin Reiki. I'll just message it on the thread.
Okay. Okay. Great.
I think I've over
Following one.
time. Yeah, please go ahead.
So there's this person called Alex Cohen. He teaches product management on Coursera. So you can follow that guy on LinkedIn, as well as there's a very basic to detailed course of his available on Coursera for free.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
we have actually exceeded time by 10 minutes. Let's take this discussion to Telegram or Slack. Let's Because we are out of time, and I think let's wrap it up. Thank you everyone for attending this session. It was it was ad hoc. I've tried my best to keep it informative as possible. Maybe next one we can plan what could be the thing that we can discuss. We can have an agenda to it. And Movin, actually, thanks to you, because of you, we were able to have a lot of fruitful discussion. As a senior person, we could learn from your experience. So special thanks to you. So thank you everyone for attending this. Let's try to keep it maybe a monthly session, and have more people join us so that we can, as a network, as a community, we can share knowledge and grow together.
Thanks, Mati, for organizing. I think it was a great effort, and hopefully this is
Yeah,
just the start, and we can do this more regularly.
right. Thanks, Mati. I mean, it
Thank you,
was
Thanks,
guys.
informative.
Manati.
Yeah,
Yeah,
bye.
great initiative.
Thank you, guys.